Oldtown smelled of salt and old promises, of tar and wet rope and the sour breath of fish laid out too long beneath a clouded sky. The rain had been falling since dusk, fine as sifted flour at first, then heavier, as if the heavens had decided that any city built on trade deserved to be washed clean of it. Samwell Tarly had walked into that rain with his shoulders hunched and his heart knocking at his ribs like a timid fist against a door that might never open. The Citadel rose pale and stern from the city's bones, its stones the color of milk left in the sun, its archways carved with faces and beasts that looked down on petitioners as if weighing their worth. Samwell Tarly felt their eyes on him as he crossed the outer yard. He had worn many fears like layers in his life. Fear of his father, fear of ridicule, fear of swords, but here his fear was quieter, more intimate. The fear of being found wanting in the one place that claimed it valued minds above muscle. Gilly kept close beside him, the hood of her cloak pulled low, the child bundled against her chest. The babe's breath puffed warmth into the hollow of her throat. It should have been impossible, Samwell Tarly thought, that something so soft could have survived so much cold. Yet the child had lived through Craster's Keep and the long march south, through the black walls of Castle Black and the cruel white of the Frostfang wind. Life, it seemed, could be stubborn even when men were not. A novice led them through the gatehouse, past the rings and the ravens and the murmuring chambers where men smelled of ink and vellum. The air within the Citadel was warmer than the streets but carried its own chill, the chill of stone that had never truly belonged to summer. Samwell Tarly heard distant quills scratching, heard a raven caw somewhere high overhead, heard the faint echo of a bell tolling in the city below. Each sound seemed to say, "You are small. You are late. You do not belong here." He tried to remind himself of what brought him. Not ambition, he had never been bold enough for ambition. Not pride, he had not been raised to it. He had come because the Night's Watch was bleeding at the edges, because the wall had begun to feel like a fragile line drawn across the throat of the world. He had come because Jon Snow had asked him to learn, and Jon Snow did not ask lightly. Jon Snow's face rose in his mind unbidden. The steady gray eyes, the solemn mouth that softened only for a moment when Samwell Tarly blurted out something earnest or foolish. Jon Snow had been murdered. Samwell Tarly could not stop the thought from coming in the shape of a knife, and yet in the letters that had reached Oldtown, the words had been strangely cautious, as if the writer feared to write what he knew. They brought Samwell Tarly to a small chamber assigned to him, where a maester with watery eyes inspected his papers and asked questions in a voice that made each word sound like a judgment. When Samwell Tarly tried to explain that he had been sent from the wall to train, that he carried knowledge of wildlings and wights and strange cold magic, the maester's expression did not change. The man had heard stories all his life. Stories were cheap in Oldtown. Proof, Samwell Tarly understood, was the coin they respected. He unpacked what few possessions he had, setting the bundle of dragonglass carefully in a corner, the black shards wrapped in cloth as if they could cut through fate itself. Gilly watched him, her gaze wary. She had learned to read fear in men's eyes without needing letters. Here, the fear was quieter, but it was present. The fear of rules, the fear of being discovered, the fear that Oldtown would take the child away, that the Citadel would decide Gilly did not belong. Samwell Tarly touched her sleeve gently. "No one will hurt you," he said. But the words tasted like a prayer he was not sure the gods would honor. Outside, thunder rolled over the harbor, slow and resentful. The high tower's beacon burned somewhere in the rain, a steady gold eye that did not blink. In the deepest part of the Citadel, a glass candle burned. Samwell Tarly did not know it yet. He only felt, as he lay down that night with damp hair and a mind that would not still, a strange pressure at the back of his skull, as if someone somewhere had looked up from an ancient book and remembered his name. Morning came slow and sullen, the sky a lid of gray hammered tight over the city. Samwell Tarly rose before the bells, stiff from the narrow bed and the long travel still lodged in his joints. He ate a crust of bread that tasted faintly of mold, drank watered ale, and tried to steady his hands before the day's first lecture. The Citadel moved to its own rhythms, indifferent to outsiders. Novices hurried with bundles of parchment. Maesters drifted like ghosts, their chains whispering against their robes. Ravens fluttered overhead, black pennants against the pale stone. By midday, Samwell Tarly's head ached with names and dates, with lists of kings and cures and ancient wars that seemed like children's quarrels compared to what waited beyond the wall. He wanted to stand up and shout that the dead walked, that the cold had teeth, that no chain in Oldtown mattered if the world ended in ice. But he did not. He sat, he listened, he took notes in careful script, and he swallowed his frustration like bitter medicine. It was near dusk when Alleras found him. Samwell Tarly was leaving the Hall of Lectures, his arms full of borrowed books, when he sensed someone watching. He turned and saw a young man leaning against a pillar as if he had been carved there, relaxed and sharp-eyed, the curve of a longbow visible beneath his cloak. Alleras smiled, a quick flash of teeth. "Samwell Tarly," Alleras said, as if tasting the name. "The Slayer." Samwell Tarly felt heat creep into his cheeks. No, that's not. All stories are wrong," Alleras said lightly, "but some are useful. You want to learn. That's good. The Citadel prefers men who want to learn, as long as they only learn what the Citadel thinks they should." Samwell Tarly blinked. "How do you know my name?" Alleras tapped the books in his arms. "The novice who gave you those has a tongue like a bell. And you have the look of a man carrying a secret too heavy for his shoulders. Come, I'll show you where the Citadel keeps the things it pretends do not exist." Samwell Tarly's heart lurched. Where?" Alleras' eyes flicked down the corridor. "Not here. Not where chains can hear." Samwell Tarly hesitated. He thought of Jon Snow. He thought of Maester Aemon, blind and ancient, speaking of dragons as if they were more than tales. He thought of the dragonglass wrapped in cloth in his room, and how the maesters had looked away from it as if looking might make it real. He followed. Alleras led him through corridors that grew narrower and older, stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air changed as they descended, growing cooler and damper. The Citadel's sounds faded until Samwell Tarly could hear only their breathing and the soft scuff of boots on steps. Gilly did not come. Samwell Tarly had asked her to stay with the babe, and she had nodded, though her eyes had clung to him as if he were going into the woods alone. He promised he would return soon. He did not tell her where he was going. He did not know if he could. At the bottom of a spiral stair, Alleras stopped before a door of iron banded with green copper. The metal was cold to the touch, slick with moisture. No lock was visible, no keyhole, only an old symbol etched into the copper. A circle within a circle, crossed by a line like a sword. Alleras lifted a lantern, letting the light play over the mark. "They say this wing is for damp storage," Alleras murmured. "Rotting scrolls, worm-eaten books, things not worth saving. But the Citadel saves everything, even what it fears." Samwell Tarly swallowed. "Why are you showing me this?" Alleras' smile had no humor in it now. "Because you came from the wall. Because men die in the snow while maesters debate whether the snow is cold. Because Archmaester Marwyn said if a boy ever came south with the stink of true winter on him, I should listen." "Archmaester Marwyn?" Samwell Tarly repeated, startled. "But Archmaester Marwyn left Oldtown. He sailed for." "Archmaester Marwyn leaves when he wishes and returns when he wishes," Alleras said. "The world is larger than chains. Open the door, Samwell Tarly." Samwell Tarly's hands trembled as he touched the iron. He expected resistance. Instead, the door yielded with a low groan, as if it had been waiting. The air that spilled out was not merely cold. It was old. It smelled of dust and salt and something sharp beneath it, like iron heated too long, like stone after lightning strikes. Alleras raised the lantern and stepped through. Samwell Tarly followed, and the darkness behind the door seemed to close around them like a mouth. The chamber was not large, but it felt endless in the way deep places do, like a well that could swallow sound. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books whose bindings were cracked and darkened, titles written in scripts Samwell Tarly did not recognize. Some were chained, as if they might escape. Some were wrapped in oilcloth like corpses. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of black stone, smooth as glass. On it burned a candle unlike any Samwell Tarly had ever seen. The flame was not yellow. It was blue-green, like the heart of a cold fire, and it did not flicker with the drafts of the underground. It burned steady, as if fed by something other than wax. Samwell Tarly's mouth went dry. "A glass candle," he whispered. He had heard of them, of course. Everyone had. Maester Luwin had called them relics of Valyria, useless as dead kings. Maester Aemon had spoken of them with a wistfulness that made Samwell Tarly think the old man had once believed in magic more than he admitted. In Oldtown, the very mention of glass candles was greeted with polite smiles, the kind given to children insisting the moon was made of cheese. And yet here it was, burning in the belly of the Citadel like a secret heart. A man stood beside it, broad-shouldered, his chain heavy on his chest, his skull shaven. His face was blunt and weathered, his eyes bright with a dangerous intelligence. He looked like a sailor who had stolen a maester's robe and dared anyone to question him. Archmaester Marwyn. Samwell Tarly stopped short, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over him. "Archmaester Marwyn," he said, his voice cracking. "But how?" Archmaester Marwyn turned, and his grin was sharp as a knife. "Samwell Tarly," Archmaester Marwyn said, "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me." Alleras closed the door behind them. The sound echoed like a seal being set. Samwell Tarly stared at the glass candle. It made his skin prickle. The flame's light painted the room in sickly colors, turning Archmaester Marwyn's face into something half alive, half carved. "Is it safe?" Samwell Tarly asked, hating how small his voice sounded. Archmaester Marwyn snorted. "Safe? Nothing worth knowing is safe. Sit, boy. You look like you might faint." Samwell Tarly lowered himself onto a stool, clutching his books as if they were shields. "Why is it burning? They say they haven't burned in 100 years. They say a great many things," Archmaester Marwyn said. He gestured with a thick finger toward the candle. "This one never went out. The Citadel kept it, buried it, pretended it was dead. But magic does not die. It sleeps, it waits, and sometimes it wakes when the world grows hungry." Alleras leaned back against a shelf, arms crossed. His eyes never left Samwell Tarly's face. Samwell Tarly's thoughts raced. "Is it because of the dragons? Because Daenerys Targaryen?" Archmaester Marwyn's smile widened. "Yes and no. Dragons are a trumpet, not the song. The so. Ing began before the first dragon ever cracked an egg." The candle's flame hissed softly. Samwell Tarly could have sworn he heard a whisper beneath it, like words spoken underwater. Archmaester Marwyn reached to a shelf and pulled down a book bound in scorched leather. He set it before Samwell Tarly with a heavy thump. Dust rose in a little cloud. "Do you know what that is?" Archmaester Marwyn asked. Samwell Tarly ran a trembling finger over the cover. The leather was rough, blistered. No title was written in common tongue. Instead, there were marks, sharp angles, and flowing lines. "Valyrian. I don't," Samwell Tarly admitted. "It is not a book meant for you," Archmaester Marwyn said. "It is a ledger, a record, a list of names and agreements and sins. The Citadel calls it a myth. I call it a confession." Samwell Tarly looked up, frightened. "Whose confession?" Archmaester Marwyn's eyes glinted in the candlelight. "Valyria's." The word struck Samwell Tarly like a blow. Valyria was a place in stories. Smoking ruins, melted towers, dragons screaming in the sky. A cautionary tale for boys who dreamed too big. Archmaester Marwyn leaned closer. "You came from the wall," Archmaester Marwyn said. "Tell me what you saw." Samwell Tarly's throat tightened. Images flooded him. The blue eyes of a white, the way dead hands clawed at black stone, the cold that felt like teeth against his bones. He spoke of the fist of the first men, of the others moving through the trees like pale gods, of the dragonglass that killed them. He spoke of the horn of Joramun, of the wildlings fleeing south, of the fear in Jon Snow's eyes when he spoke of what might come. Archmaester Marwyn listened without interruption. When Samwell Tarly finished, the chamber seemed quieter, as if even the candle had paused to hear. Archmaester Marwyn nodded once. "So it begins again," Archmaester Marwyn said. "Again?" Samwell Tarly whispered. "All cycles are again," Archmaester Marwyn replied. He tapped the Valyrian ledger. "And that is why this matters. Not because of dragons, not because of kings, because Valyria did not die the way your histories say. Valyria did not simply fall." Archmaester Marwyn's voice lowered, and the words felt like blasphemy in stone. "Valyria burned itself." Samwell Tarly stared. "That's impossible." Archmaester Marwyn laughed softly. "Impossible is a word men use when they are afraid of what is true." The glass candle's flame flared, and for a heartbeat the chamber smelled like ash and salt and something sweeter, like hot metal, like blood on a forge. Samwell Tarly's vision swam. He blinked, and the candlelight did not merely light the room. It lit something behind his eyes. For a moment, he saw a city of black stone beneath a red sky, towers like spears, bridges of carved dragonbone. Men and women with silver-gold hair moving through halls lined with fire. He saw 14 mountains, their peaks glowing like coals. He heard a chanting that made his skin crawl. Then the vision snapped away like a rope breaking, and Samwell Tarly was back in the cold chamber, gasping. Archmaester Marwyn watched him closely. "It sees you," Archmaester Marwyn said. "Good. That means you can see it." Samwell Tarly's hands shook so badly, he nearly knocked the ledger from the table. "Why me?" Archmaester Marwyn's gaze sharpened. "Because you are Jon Snow's friend," Archmaester Marwyn said. "And because Jon Snow is the key Valyria buried in fire." Samwell Tarly's breath came shallow. "Jon Snow?" he repeated, as if the name might steady him. "How can Jon Snow have anything to do with Valyria? Jon Snow he is the son of, bastard," Archmaester Marwyn finished bluntly. "Or so the world has said. The world says what it needs to say to keep itself simple." Samwell Tarly's mind stumbled over old conversations, over Maester Aemon's soft voice speaking of prophecy, of a prince that was promised, over Jon Snow's stubborn insistence that blood did not decide who a man was, over the way Jon Snow's gaze had lingered on the dragonglass blades as if they belonged to him by right. Archmaester Marwyn turned a page of the ledger. The parchment was not parchment at all. It felt thicker, more like cured hide. The writing was scored deep, as if carved rather than inked. Some of it shimmered faintly in the candlelight. "This is called the Last Mandate," Archmaester Marwyn said. "A record of the Freehold's final decree. They wrote it when they realized the world's balance was tipping, when they realized the cold beyond the north was not a story to frighten children. They had traitors, Samwell Tarly. They had slaves. They had spies. They knew of the far north long before any Undull ever set foot in Westeros." Samwell Tarly swallowed. "They knew about the others?" Archmaester Marwyn's eyes gleamed. "They knew about winter that walks. They knew about hunger that wears faces. The Freehold did not fear men. They feared what men become when the world is starved of fire." Alleras shifted, listening. The candlelight made his eyes look almost black. Archmaester Marwyn traced a line of Valyrian with a thick finger, then spoke the words aloud. The sound was harsh and beautiful, like steel on stone. Samwell Tarly understood none of it, yet the syllables made his bones ache. He tried to look at the page anyway, to force meaning into the shapes. One phrase repeated, carved again and again as if it were a nail hammered into wood. A circle and a line, a mark like the symbol on the iron door above. "What does it say?" Samwell Tarly asked. Archmaester Marwyn's voice grew quieter. "It says, the world must be sealed. Fire must hold the door. Ice must name the lock." Samwell Tarly frowned. "I don't." Archmaester Marwyn tapped the page again. "The doom was not only destruction," Archmaester Marwyn said. "It was a forging. 14 volcanoes, 14 flames. Valyria turned itself into a chain wrapped around something beneath the world. A ward, boy. A ward that burned so fiercely it pushed the long cold back into its lair. Samwell Tarly's stomach turned. You're saying they killed themselves to stop the others? I am saying they killed themselves to stop what comes after the others, Archmaester Marwyn said. Samwell Tarly went still. Even the candle's hiss seemed to sharpen. What comes after? Samwell Tarly whispered. Archmaester Marwyn leaned back, and for a moment his blunt face looked tired, older than S. Samwell Tarly had thought. There are older things than ice, Archmaester Marwyn said. Older than dragons, older than weirwoods, older than any king's line. The world is a skin stretched thin over a deep fire. Valyria understood that. They dug too deep. They found a truth that frightened even dragon lords. Samwell Tarly's mouth tasted of bile. He imagined men digging into the earth, hearing something breathing beneath the stone. He imagined the 14 flames as mouths rather than mountains. Alleras spoke softly. The mandate mentions a failsafe, Alleras said. A final hand. Archmaester Marwyn nodded, then turned another page. The writing here was denser, the lines tighter. It looked less like a decree and more like a plan. There is always a final hand, Archmaester Marwyn said. The freehold knew their ward would weaken. Magic is not a wall that stands forever. It is a rope that frays. The more magic rises in the world, the more the old cold stirs. Dragons returning, glass candles burning, the dead walking. These are not separate events. They are threads of the same unraveling. Samwell Tarly's voice broke. So what does Jon Snow have to do with it? Archmaester Marwyn looked at him as if weighing whether to tell him the truth. Then he spoke, and each word felt like a hammer. The mandate says the seal may be renewed only by one who can stand in fire and name ice without dying, Archmaester Marwyn said. It says the air must carry the heat of Valyria and the blood of the old gods. It says the world's lock was built to accept only one shape. Samwell Tarly stared, heart pounding. That's impossible. Is it? Archmaester Marwyn asked. You were at the wall. You saw what dragged men into the snow. You saw dragonglass cut through death like a truth. Do you think blood is only blood? Do you think names are only names? Samwell Tarly shook his head, but his mind was racing, desperate. He thought of the tales of Lyanna Stark. He thought of Rhaegar Targaryen, the Silver Prince with sad eyes. He thought of whispers Maester Aemon had shared when he was too weak to keep secrets any longer. Archmaester Marwyn watched him understand, watched the realization creep into him like cold. No, Samwell Tarly breathed. No, Jon Snow is. Archmaester Marwyn's grin returned, sharp and satisfied. Yes, Archmaester Marwyn said, or close enough that the world will bleed for the difference. The glass candle flared again, and Samwell Tarly's eyes filled with a vision he did not ask for. A boy stood on a black stone stair that spiraled downward into red light. His hair was dark, his face pale, his eyes gray. He was older than Samwell Tarly remembered, and his mouth was set in a grim line as if he had already made a decision he could never take back. Jon Snow. Behind Jon Snow, a shadow moved, massive, winged, black as a starless sky. The air shimmered with heat, yet frost crusted the edges of the stone. Jon Snow turned, as if hearing Samwell. He speak his name through the world. For a heartbeat, his gaze met Samwell Tarly's through the candle flame. Then the vision snapped, and Samwell Tarly cried out, jerking back so hard his stool scraped the floor. Alleras caught his arm, steadying him. Archmaester Marwyn did not look surprised. He looked grimly satisfied, like a man who had been waiting for confirmation. It begins, Archmaester Marwyn said, and it will not wait for the Citadel's comfort. Far to the north, the wall groaned like an old beast in its sleep. Jon Snow stood where the wind hit hardest, where the ice rose sheer into the night and made a man feel as if he were perched at the edge of the world. The cold cut through furs and wool, found the places where flesh still remembered warmth, and bit down. Jon Snow barely noticed. He had been colder than this. He had been colder in places the living did not speak of. Ghost moved beside him, silent as snowfall. The direwolf's red eyes were the only color in a world of black and white. Jon Snow could feel Ghost's presence not only at his side but behind his eyes, a second heartbeat pacing his own. When Jon Snow closed his eyes, the dreams came. They were never gentle. He dreamed of stone that was not stone, smooth and black and warm beneath his bare feet. He dreamed of a stair spiraling down into a red glow, as if the earth had a heart and it was beating beneath him. He dreamed of a city of towers melted into shapes that looked like men in agony. He heard voices speaking a language he had never learned, and yet the words sank into him like hooks. Once, in the dream, a woman with hair like silver wire turned and looked at him. Her eyes were purple, deep and old. Her mouth moved, and Jon Snow heard his own name spoken as if it were an incantation. Not Jon, Aegon. He woke with frost on his lashes and a taste of ash on his tongue. Tonight was worse. Tonight the dream had followed him into waking. He leaned on the parapet, staring out over the haunted forest. The trees below stood stiff and dark, their branches clawing at the sky. Somewhere out there, something watched. Jon Snow did not need Melisandre's fires to know it. He could feel it in the way the night held its breath. Ghost's ears pricked. A low growl vibrated in the direwolf's chest. "What is it?" Jon Snow murmured, though he already knew the answer his bones were giving him. Something was moving in the dark, something not quite alive. Behind him, footsteps crunched on snow. Jon Snow turned, hand moving instinctively toward the sword at his hip. The sword was Longclaw, its Valyrian steel pale in the torchlight, the wolf's head pommel cold beneath his fingers. The steel had always felt like a borrowed thing, a gift he had not deserved. Lately, it had begun to feel like it remembered him. Melisandre stepped from the stairwell onto the wall's top, her red robes whipping around her legs like flame. Her face was too pale in the torchlight, her hair a dark river down her back. The ruby at her throat glimmered as if it held a tiny sun. "You should not be here alone," Melisandre said. Jon Snow's jaw tightened. "This is my wall," Jon Snow said. "Or it was." Melisandre's eyes did not blink. "It is still yours in the way the grave is still yours," Melisandre replied softly. "You walked away from death, Jon Snow. Death does not like being denied." Jon Snow looked back out at the forest. "Death can be as angry as it likes," Jon Snow said. "I'm tired of it." Melisandre moved closer, her boots leaving dark prints where the snow melted beneath them, as if her very presence carried heat. "You are tired," Melisandre agreed, "and the world is tired. That is why the fires speak louder now." Jon Snow felt his temper stir. "Your fires," Jon Snow said. "Your God. You always speak as if you own the truth." Melisandre's gaze sharpened. "I do not own it," Melisandre said. "I serve it. And it serves you, whether you wish it or not." Ghost's growl deepened, and Jon Snow rested a hand on the direwolf's neck, feeling the thick fur, the steady strength. "What do you see?" Jon Snow asked, though part of him did not want the answer. Melisandre looked past him, out into the dark. "I see a stair of black stone," Melisandre said slowly. "I see a city drowned in fire. I see your shadow stretched long across a smoking sea." Jon Snow's breath caught. He had not spoken of his dreams. He had not told anyone about the black stair. Melisandre's voice lowered. "I see a crown of ash," Melisandre murmured, "and beneath it, a door." Jon Snow's hand tightened on the parapet. "A door to what?" Melisandre's eyes flashed, reflecting torchlight like blood. "To the thing that should not wake," Melisandre said. "To the old hunger that wears winter like a cloak." The wind howled, and for a moment Jon Snow thought he heard something else beneath it. A sound like distant singing, low and terrible, vibrating through the ice. Melisandre turned her face toward him. "You feel it," Melisandre said. "You feel the world pulling you toward something you cannot name." Jon Snow swallowed. "I feel a lot of things," Jon Snow said roughly. Most of them are pain. Melisandre reached out, and her fingers brushed the wolf's head pommel of Longclaw. The ruby at her throat glowed brighter for an instant. Jon Snow felt a sudden pulse in the sword, a faint warmth that startled him. Melisandre's voice was almost a whisper. "Valyrian steel remembers fire," Melisandre said. "And you remember ice." Jon Snow jerked his gaze to her. "What are you talking about?" Melisandre's eyes held his. "Do you know why the wall was raised, Jon Snow?" Melisandre asked. "Not the stories, not the songs, the true reason." Jon Snow's mouth went dry. "To keep the others out," Jon Snow said, though even as he said it, he remembered the old horn, the cracks in ancient ice, the sense that the wall was less a barrier and more a seal. Melisandre nodded slowly. "Yes," Melisandre said, "a seal, and seals can be broken." Ghost's ears flattened. His hackles rose. Somewhere below, in the trees, a faint crack sounded, like ice splitting. Jon Snow looked down into the forest, and for a heartbeat he saw something pale between the trunks, something tall and still. Then it was gone. Jon Snow's blood ran cold. "They're close," Jon Snow said. Melisandre's voice turned sharp. "Then you must choose," Melisandre said. "You cannot remain a man, standing on a wall forever. The world is moving. The old fire is calling. The old ice is rising. And you are between them." Jon Snow stared at the night until his eyes ached. The black forest looked like a mouth waiting to swallow him. In the distance, the wall shuddered. A deep groan rolled through the ice as if something far below had shifted in its sleep. Jon Snow felt it in his bones, a vibration like a giant heartbeat. He did not know the name of what was calling him. But he knew, with the certainty of a man who had died once already, that it would not be denied. Melisandre took Jon Snow to the King's Tower not as a guest but as an inevitability. The stair up was narrow, spiraling, the stone damp beneath Jon Snow's boots. Ghost followed without complaint. The tower smelled of smoke and resin, of dried herbs hung from the rafters, of something sharp and foreign that clung to Melisandre's presence like perfume. At the top chamber, a brazier burned, its coals glowing orange-red. The heat hit Jon Snow's face, and for a moment he nearly flinched. After the cold outside, the warmth felt too intimate, too much like a hand pressed against a bruise. Melisandre moved to the brazier and tossed in a pinch of powder that sparked green, then blue. The flames leapt, twisting. Jon Snow's skin prickled. "Stand there," Melisandre said, pointing to a spot before the fire, "and do not look away." Jon Snow's jaw tightened, but he stepped forward. Ghost sat at his heel, watching Melisandre with a predator's patience. Melisandre's eyes fixed on the flames. Her lips moved in a language Jon Snow did not know, yet the sound of it made him think of his dreams, of the harsh beauty of Valyrian syllables. The ruby at her throat glowed like a drop of blood caught in sunlight. The flames changed. At first Jon Snow saw only fire. Then the fire began to shape itself into forms. Black stone rising like ribs, a stair spiraling downward. He saw a sea choked with smoke, waves breaking against twisted ruins. He saw men in armor the color of night, their helms shaped like dragons, standing in a hall of black glass. He saw a woman with silver hair in a gown that looked like molten metal. He saw a child with dark hair and gray eyes walking into red light. He saw himself. Jon Snow's breath hitched. "Stop," Jon Snow said, but the word came out weak. Melisandre did not stop. "Look," Melisandre whispered. "Look and remember." Jon Snow's hands clenched. The heat from the brazier was nothing compared to the heat in the vision, the heat of a world burning. He smelled ash. He tasted metal. The images shifted. He saw a mountain split open, fire pouring out like blood. He saw 14 mountains, all erupting at once, the sky turning red. He saw people running through streets of black stone, their skin blistering as the air itself caught flame. He heard screams, but beneath the screams he heard something else. A chant, steady and deliberate, as if the destruction were being conducted like music. Jon Snow staggered, his stomach lurching. "That's Valyria," Jon Snow breathed. Melisandre's voice was low. "Yes," Melisandre said, "and it was not an accident." Jon Snow's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" Melisandre turned her gaze to him, and the flames reflected in her eyes made them look like pools of living fire. "The doom was a choice," Melisandre said. "A sacrifice, fire used as a chain." Jon Snow's throat tightened. "A chain for what?" Melisandre hesitated, and in that hesitation Jon Snow saw fear, real fear, flicker across her face. Like a shadow. "A door," Melisandre said at last. "A door sealed with flame and blood. A door that is weakening now." Jon Snow's pulse hammered. "Why show me this?" Jon Snow demanded. "What do you want from me?" Melisandre's mouth tightened. "I want you to live," Melisandre said. "I want you to stop dying for other men's wars. I want you to do what you were brought back to do." Jon Snow's eyes burned. "Brought back?" Jon Snow repeated, bitter. "As if I asked for it." "The fire did not ask," Melisandre said. "It commanded." Ghost rose, pacing a step, as if restless with the tension. Jon Snow looked down at the direwolf, feeling the bond between them pulse like a second bloodstream. In the flames, the black Stair appeared again. This time it seemed closer, sharper. The stone glistened with a damp sheen. Frost rimed its edges, impossible in the red glow. Jon Snow could not stop staring. The Stair looked like the inside of his own skull. Spiraling, descending, pulling. He heard a word again, a word he did not know yet understood. "Finish." Jon Snow stumbled back from the brazier. "No," Jon Snow said hoarsely. "No, I am not." Melisandre's voice cut through him. "You are the hinge," Melisandre said. "You are the hand Valyria expected to return when the world unraveled. You are ice and fire bound in one body. You have the blood of the dragon and the blood of the wolf." Jon Snow's laugh was harsh, humorless. "You don't know what you're saying." Melisandre stepped closer until the heat of her body brushed him. "I know exactly what I am saying," Melisandre whispered, "and the fire knows it too. That is why you dream in a language you never learned. That is why the dead cannot keep you. That is why the wall groans when you walk its top." Jon Snow's breath shook. "If what you say is true," Jon Snow said, "then the world is already damned." Melisandre's eyes did not soften. "Then you must decide whether you will damn it further by refusing," Melisandre said. Outside, the wind slammed against the tower, and the stones seemed to shiver. For a moment Jon Snow thought he felt the wall itself listening, waiting. He turned away from the brazier and looked out the narrow window. The night was a black ocean. Snow whipped through the air like white ash. Somewhere beyond that darkness was the haunted forest, and beyond that, the world. Somewhere far south, Samwell Tarly read books and tried to find answers. Somewhere far east, dragons burned and prophecy woke. Jon Snow pressed his forehead to the cold stone of the window frame, letting it bite into him. The cold steadied him more than the fire ever could. "Tell me," Jon Snow said, voice low, "tell me what the door leads to." Melisandre's silence was long enough that Jon Snow began to think she would not answer. When she did, her words were barely audible over the wind. "To the hunger beneath the world," Melisandre said. "To the thing Valyria chained with its own death. To the thing that makes the others look like scouts." Jon Snow closed his eyes, and the black Stair spiraled behind his lids. "Finish," the dream whispered. "Finish." Beyond the wall, where the world turned ancient and quiet, Bran Stark sat beneath a weirwood whose roots had grown into the stone like fingers into flesh. The cave was cold, but it was not the clean cold of winter air. It was a deep cold, damp and clinging, the cold of earth that had never seen sunlight. The roots of the weirwood wrapped around Bran Stark's legs and waist, pale as bones, slick with sap that smelled faintly of blood. Bran Stark's eyes were white, his pupils lost in the flood of what he saw. He flew over forests, over mountains, over seas. He sank into the ground, into the dark where worms and roots moved. He walked through time the way a man walked through a hall, brushing against moments like tapestries. He saw the wall from above, a great white scar across the world. He saw Jon Snow standing on it, dark against the ice, ghost beside him like a shadow given teeth. He saw Melisandre's ruby glow, saw fire dancing in a tower window. He saw Oldtown. He saw the Citadel like a pale spider, its legs spread over the city. He saw Samwell Tarly beneath it, small and earnest, his hands trembling over an ancient book. He saw a glass candle burning, its flame blue-green, unnatural. He saw Valyria, not the ruin the world spoke of, not only the smoking sea and melted stone. Bran Stark saw Valyria before the doom, when its towers still stood straight and black, when dragons nested on palace roofs like living banners. He saw dragon lords in halls of polished obsidian, their hair silver gold, their eyes purple and cruel. He saw slaves kneel and tremble, saw blood spill into channels carved into stone. He saw the 14 flames, 14 mountains ringing the heart of the freehold like teeth around a tongue. He saw tunnels drilled into them, deeper and deeper, men chanting, magic humming through the rock like a vein of heat. He saw fear, not fear of armies, not fear of rebellion, but fear of something beneath. Bran Stark drifted down into the earth. He sank past stone, past molten rock, past places where the heat should have cooked his mind. He felt something stir, far below, something vast. A hunger. It was not a creature in the way men understood creatures. It was a pressure, a want, a pulling at the world like fingers trying to peel open skin. Bran Stark's mind brushed it, and he recoiled instinctively, even though his body could not move. The hunger noticed him, turned, slowly, like a giant thing waking in the dark. Bran Stark felt its attention like a weight on his skull. Then fire slammed down. 14 volcanoes erupted in his vision at once, not randomly, not with the wildness of nature, but in a pattern, like a net thrown over something thrashing. The earth screamed, the sky turned red, the sea boiled, and beneath it all, Bran Stark heard a chanting that was not panic but purpose. The doom. But Bran Stark saw something no maester's history had ever written. He saw dragon lords standing in a circle at the heart of the forged temple, their hands cut, their blood dripping onto runes carved into black stone. He saw them speaking words that made the air ripple. He saw them die willingly, their faces grim as if they were closing a door no one must open again. He saw the lock being set, a lock that burned, a lock that would weaken, a lock that needed a final key. Bran Stark's vision snapped forward through time, racing like a raven on a storm wind. He saw the lock fraying as magic returned to the world. He saw dragons hatching, glass candles burning, shadows growing long in the north. He saw the hunger beneath the world stirring, stretching. He saw a boy with dark hair and gray eyes lying in snow, blood pooling beneath him, men shouting, knives flashing. He saw that boy's spirit slip into a direwolf, see the wolf's red eyes flare with human grief. He saw fire pulling the boy back, forcing breath into dead lungs. Jon Snow. Bran Stark heard the weirwood leaves rustle though no wind touched them. He felt Bloodraven's presence like an old crow perched in the dark. "You see it," Bloodraven said, his voice like dry leaves. "You see the truth men buried." Bran Stark's mouth did not move, but his mind answered. "Why?" Bran Stark asked, the question a cry through the roots. Bloodraven's laughter was quiet and sad. "Because the world is older than any king," Bloodraven said. "Because long ago, men and dragons both tried to chain what should never be free. Because chains rust." Bran Stark fought to push his vision back toward the wall, toward Jon Snow. He saw Jon Snow again, saw him standing in Melisandre's tower, saw his face hardening as he listened to truths that tasted like ash. Bran Stark reached for Jon Snow through the weirwood network, through sap and root and time. He sent a thought like a raven. Valyria didn't die. It went to sleep. The message flew south through the trees, through the wall itself, slipping past ice and spell. Bran Stark felt the hunger beneath the world turn again, as if listening, as if amused. Then the visions shifted, and Bran Stark saw a ship on dark water, its sails black as a crow's wing. He saw a man at its prow with one eye and a smile like a cut.
Euron Greyjoy.
He saw Euron Greyjoy holding a horn banded in strange metal, his fingers caressing it like a lover. He saw warlocks chained in the hold, their lips blue, their eyes wide with terror. He saw the smoking sea in the distance, a smear of gray and red beneath a bruised sky. Bran Stark tried to pull away, but the hunger beneath the world pulsed, and the weirwood roots tightened as if the tree itself were bracing. Bloodraven's voice came again, grim. "The lock is weakening," Bloodraven said, "and there are men who would pry it open." Bran Stark's mind screamed through the roots, through the leaves, through time. Jon Snow, Bran Stark thought, fierce and desperate. You have to finish what they started. The sea did not frighten Euron Greyjoy. The sea was his first lover, his oldest god, his truest home. Storms were only applause. Drowning was only a failure of will. His ship cut through the night like a blade, black sails billowing against a sky bruised purple with cloud. The wind smelled of salt and something else, something sour and burnt drifting from the east. The men on deck spoke less as that smell strengthened. Even Ironborn, who prided themselves on fearlessness, grew quiet when the world began to taste wrong. Euron Greyjoy stood at the prow, the wet wind whipping his hair around his face. The leather patch over his left eye gleamed with moisture. His right eye was bright, unnaturally blue in the darkness, as if it caught light that did not exist. Behind him, 3 warlocks knelt in chains. Their lips were cracked, their skin pale beneath the moonlight, their eyes wide with hatred and terror. Euron Greyjoy had taken them from Qarth not for their beauty but for their knowledge. Men thought knowledge came from books. Euron Greyjoy knew knowledge could be pulled from living throats with the right amount of pressure. He turned the horn in his hands. It was not Dragonbinder. That horn lay wrapped and guarded below, a prize he had already used once to make men tremble. This horn was older. The metal bands around it were black, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when he did not look directly at them. The horn's surface was ridged like bone, and when Euron Greyjoy pressed his thumb against it, the material felt warm, almost alive. He had found it in a ruin along the Basilisk Isles, in a temple so old the stones had become half-swallowed by jungle. The priests there had wept when they saw it. They had called it by a name in a tongue that had died before the first Undul had ever sharpened a sword. Euron Greyjoy had killed them for their tears. He lifted the horn now, letting the night air taste it. One of the warlocks spat at his boots. Euron Greyjoy looked down, smiling. "Does it hurt?" Euron Greyjoy asked softly. "Knowing you were born into a world of small men and smaller gods?" The warlock's eyes flashed. "You will die screaming," the warlock rasped, his accent thick. "The smoking sea will swallow you. The curse is a bedtime story," Euron Greyjoy murmured, almost lovingly. Valyria was not cursed. Valyria was sealed. He tasted the word, delighted by it. Sealed. A door closed, a secret buried. Men had whispered for generations about the doom, about dragonlords turned to ash, about stone men and poisoned air, about demons in the smoke. Most men heard those whispers and pulled their blankets tighter. Euron Greyjoy heard them and thought, treasure, power, a god's engine hidden beneath ruin. His men glanced at him uneasily. Victarion Greyjoy would have called it madness. Aeron Damphair would have called it blasphemy. Balon Greyjoy would have called it foolish risk. Balon Greyjoy was dead. All men died. The ONL. Why difference was whether they died reaching for something worthy. Euron Greyjoy glanced east, where the horizon was smeared with red fog like a wound. The smoking sea. Even at this distance, the air felt heavy, strange. The water's surface ahead seemed slicker, darker, as if oil floated on it. One of his crew muttered a prayer to the drowned god.
Euron Greyjoy Lokehead.
Your drowned god sleeps, Euron Greyjoy said. But mine is awake." He lifted the horn to his lips. The warlocks strained against their chains, eyes widening. "No," one whispered, voice cracking. "Do not."
Euron Greyjoy bliv.
The sound was not a sound. It was a pressure that shoved itself into the world. The air thickened. The ship's timbers creaked. The sea beneath them seemed to ripple, not with waves but with something deeper, as if a great creature had shifted in its sleep. Men clapped hands over their ears, faces contorting. One fell to his knees, vomiting. Euron Greyjoy felt the vibration run through his bones like a lover's touch. He tasted iron. He tasted ash. Far ahead, the red fog over the smoking sea pulsed, faintly, like a heartbeat answering his call. He lowered the horn, breathing hard, smiling wider. The warlocks stared at him with horror that went beyond hatred now. One began to sob, a thin, broken sound. Euron Greyjoy leaned down until his face was close to the warlocks. "Tell me," Euron Greyjoy whispered, soft as a kiss. "Tell me what they locked away." The warlock's lips trembled. "Hunger," the warlock whispered. "Fire and cold together. A thing beneath. A thing that remembers." Euron Greyjoy's right eye gleamed. "Good," Euron Greyjoy said. He straightened, facing the red horizon again. The smoking sea waited, patient as a grave. Euron Greyjoy's men looked at him as if he were already a dead man. Euron Greyjoy only smiled. A door had been closed long ago, and Euron Greyjoy had found the handle. In Meereen, far across the world, Daenerys Targaryen could not sleep. The Great Pyramid's chambers were cool, their stone thick enough to keep the worst of the day's heat at bay. Yet Daenerys Targaryen lay restless beneath silk sheets that felt like shackles. The city outside murmured in the darkness. Distant voices, far-off footsteps, the occasional shout of a guard. Beyond that, she could hear her dragons, or at least feel them. A low rumble in the air like thunder trapped in a cage. Tyrion Lannister sat at a table near the window, his mismatched eyes reflecting torchlight as he turned a goblet slowly in his hands. He had been 1,000 different men in his life. Imp, hand, prisoner, advisor. But tonight he looked like what he truly was. A man who had seen the world's cruelty and learned to smile at it because weeping did no good. Daenerys Targaryen rose, padding barefoot across the cold stone. Melisandre watched her with anxious eyes, hands clasped. Grey Worm was somewhere beyond the door, silent as ever. Daenerys Targaryen spread a map on the table. It was an old one, taken from a merchant ship, its edges frayed, its ink faded. Tyrion Lannister had helped her mark it with more accurate notes, scratching out lies, adding truths. Westeros lay to the west, sharp-edged and familiar from her dreams. Essos sprawled beneath her hands like a living thing. Her gaze drifted east and south, toward the smudge of ink labeled Valyria. Someone had circled it in red. Daenerys Targaryen's throat tightened. She had never seen Valyria, not truly. Only in dreams. Only in Viserys Targaryen's bitter stories, told with tears and rage. "We were kings," Viserys Targaryen had said. "We were dragons, and they took it from us." Daenerys Targaryen had believed the doom was punishment, as most did. Valyria's arrogance turned on itself. Fire consumed fire, but lately her dreams had changed. She dreamed of a city burning, yes, but she also dreamed of men standing in a circle, their hands bleeding, their faces resolute. She dreamed of a door closing beneath fire. She dreamed of a stair spiraling downward into red light. And on that stair she saw a man with dark hair and gray eyes, his face carved with grief. In the dream, the man turned and looked at her, and Daenerys Targaryen felt a shock like lightning in her chest, as if she had met him before in another life. "Aegon," the dream whispered. She did not tell Tyrion Lannister. She did not tell Melisandre. She did not tell anyone. A queen could not afford to be ruled by dreams. Yet the dragons were restless too. Tonight Drogon's roar had rattled the pyramid stones, deep and furious, as if he smelled something he hated. Rhaegal and Viserion had answered, their voices echoing through the night like distant war horns. Tyrion Lannister watched Daenerys Targaryen trace the red circle around Valyria with her finger. Thinking of home? Tyrion Lannister asked softly. Daenerys Targaryen's laugh was quiet, sharp. Valyria is not my home, Daenerys Targaryen said. Valyria is a grave. Most homes are, Tyrion Lannister replied. The difference is whether you inherit the bones or make new ones. Daenerys Targaryen's eyes narrowed. You speak as if you know Valyria. Tyrion Lannister shrugged. I know stories, Tyrion Lannister said, and I know men. Valyria built an empire on fire and blood. Empires rarely end politely. Daenerys Targaryen's fingers tightened on the map. What if it didn't end? Daenerys Targaryen asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. What if Valyria chose to burn? Tyrion Lannister's expression shifted, the humor fading. That is an unusual question, Tyrion Lannister said carefully. Daenerys Targaryen stared at the red circle. My dreams, Daenerys Targaryen whispered. They are not only dreams. They feel like memories I never lived. Missandei's voice was small. Your Grace, Missandei said. Dreams can be cruel. Daenerys Targaryen looked up, and her eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Dreams can be warnings, Daenerys Targaryen said. Tyrion Lannister leaned forward, elbows on the table. When a Targaryen dreams, the world tends to bleed, Tyrion Lannister said. So yes, I would call that warning. Daenerys Targaryen's jaw set. If Valyria burned itself, Daenerys Targaryen said, voice low, then it did not do it for nothing. Tyrion Lannister studied her, his gaze sharp. And if it did not do it for nothing, Tyrion Lannister said, then someone somewhere is meant to pick up what was left behind. Daenerys Targaryen felt cold creep up her spine. Someone, Daenerys Targaryen repeated. Outside, a dragon roared again, and the sound rolled through the pyramid like thunder. The torches flickered. Shadows danced on the walls, briefly shaping themselves into wings. Daenerys Targaryen's hand hovered over the red circle on the map. In her mind, she saw the black stair again. She saw the man with gray eyes. She did not know his name in waking life, but she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that her dragons were calling to something beyond her war in Meereen, beyond her dream of the Iron Throne. Something older, something buried in fire. Tyrion Lannister watched her silently, as if seeing the thought move behind her eyes. Daenerys Targaryen whispered, not to him, not to Missandei, but to the map and the world beyond it. If there is a plan, Daenerys Targaryen said, I will not be its pawn. The dragons answered with another roar, and in the sound Daenerys Targaryen heard a word she did not know, a word that felt like a command. Finish. Samwell Tarly's hands were still shaking hours later. Archmaester Marwyn had dismissed him with a slap to the shoulder and a warning that sounded like a threat wrapped in advice. Trust no chain, Archmaester Marwyn had said. Not even your own. Alleras had escorted Samwell Tarly back through the iron door, up the winding stairs, and into the Citadel's ordinary corridors where life continued as if the world were not cracking at its seams. Samwell Tarly returned to his small chamber feeling as if he had been underwater and now could not breathe properly in air. Gilly slept on the narrow bed, the babe nestled against her breast. Her face looked softer in sleep, younger. Samwell Tarly watched them for a long moment, trying to anchor himself in that quiet proof that the world still held innocence somewhere. He sat at the table, lit his candle, and pulled out parchment. He had to write to Jon Snow. He did not know how to put it into words without sounding mad. He did not know how to write of glass candles burning beneath the Citadel, of Archmaester Marwyn speaking of Valyria as if it were a lock rather than a ruin. He did not know how to tell Jon Snow that his name might not be his name, that his blood might be the hinge on which the world turned. Samwell Tarly dipped his quill into ink. His fingers were clumsy, stained black. He wrote anyway. He wrote of the glass candle, careful not to name it plainly in case eyes read his letter along the way. He wrote of a light that sees across the world. He wrote of a ledger that claimed Valyria's doom was deliberate. He wrote of a seal of fire weakening as dragons returned. He wrote of a black stair and a command to finish what was begun. His hand cramped, his words blurred. He paused, swallowing hard. Then he wrote the hardest sentence. Jon Snow, Archmaester Marwyn says you are bound to this. He says the old fire and the old ice both know you, as if you were made for them. I do not understand, but I am afraid that you must. He hesitated over Jon Snow's name, then added, in smaller script beneath it, he called you Aegon. Samwell Tarly stared at the ink until it felt like it might crawl off the page. He sealed the letter with wax, pressed his thumb into it until it hurt, as if pain could make it more real. Then he carried it into the corridor where the Ravenry novice waited. The raven they gave him was old, one eye cloudy, the other sharp, cocked its head as if judging Samwell Tarly's worth. Samwell Tarly attached the scroll to its leg with trembling fingers. "Please," Samwell Tarly whispered, feeling foolish. "Please fly." The raven croaked, then launched into the air, wings beating hard as it vanished into the Citadel's passages and up toward the open sky. Samwell Tarly stood alone in the corridor for a long time, listening to the distant rain. Under the door of the corridor far below, a faint blue-green flicker pulsed, so subtle most men would never notice. Samwell Tarly not. He felt it like a heartbeat beneath stone. The glass candle burned. Far to the north, on the wall, Jon Snow received a raven as the night deepened. The bird arrived stiff with cold, feathers rimed with frost. It landed on Jon Snow's forearm, talons biting through leather. Ghost stood beside Jon Snow, watching with red-eyed intensity. Jon Snow took the scroll with careful fingers. The wax seal was cracked from the journey. The parchment smelled faintly of smoke and ink and something else. Something sharp like hot metal. Jon Snow carried it to a torch and read. As his eyes moved over Samwell Tarly's words, Jon Snow felt the world tilt. Valyria burned itself. A seal of fire, a black stair, finish, and then the name, Aegon. Jon Snow's hand tightened until the parchment crinkled. The torch flame wavered. For a moment Jon Snow heard the same low vibration he had heard in his dreams, the sound like a distant song beneath ice. Ghost pressed closer, flank against Jon Snow's leg, steady and solid. Jon Snow looked out over the wall into the black forest beyond. Snow fell in slow spirals, soft as ash. He could not see the door Melisandre spoke of. He could not see the lock Valyria had forged with its own death. But he could feel it. He could feel something in the world shifting, stretching, waking. Jon Snow folded Samwell Tarly's letter carefully, as if it were fragile, as if it might shatter if handled too roughly. He tucked it into his cloak. Then Jon Snow whispered into the wind, not as a prayer, not as a plea, but as a grim acknowledgement of something he had tried too long to deny. "All right," Jon Snow said. Ghost's ears pricked, as if hearing an echo. Jon Snow's breath steamed in the torchlight. The night pressed close. Somewhere far away, under ash and smoke, a door trembled in its frame. Jon Snow stared into the dark until his eyes watered. "Show me the way," Jon Snow whispered. And the wall, ancient and listening, groaned softly beneath his boots, as if answering. The letter felt heavier than parchment ought to. Jon held it as if it might burn him, and perhaps it already had, quietly, from the inside out. Davos watched him read a second time, then a third, the lines creasing where Jon's fingers tightened. The Onion Knight had learned to read late in life, and slowly, but he had learned other things early and well. How a man's face changed when truth arrived like a fist. "What is it?" Davos asked at last. He kept his voice low, respectful of walls that had ears and men who listened too hard. Jon didn't answer at once. He stared at the map on the table, at the crude scratches marking castles and roads, the wall a hard line like a scar. The ink seemed suddenly insufficient. The world was not ink. The world was blood and heat and cold, and something older beneath all of it that Sam's words had awakened. "Sam found something," Jon said finally. His voice was rough, scraped raw by wind and sleeplessness. "In Oldtown, A book they buried. He says Valyria didn't fall. It burned itself. Davos blinked. Burned itself. Jon nodded once. Sharp. On purpose. Like a man setting fire to his own house to kill rats in the walls. Melisandre's ruby caught the torchlight and gave it back as a dull, ominous glow. She did not speak, but Jon felt her attention like a hand on the back of his neck. Davos leaned over the map, squinting at the coastline where the narrow sea curled. What's that got to do with us? Jon's mouth tightened. He could hear the old word again. Finish, whispering behind his thoughts like wind slipping under a door. It has to do with me, Jon said, and hated how certain it sounded. Sam wrote a name. Davos frowned. A name. Jon folded the parchment once, then again, as if he could trap the words inside it. Aegon, he said. The chamber seemed to go quieter. Even the brazier's small crackle sounded distant. Davos stared, confusion giving way to a wary understanding. That's a Targaryen name. Jon's throat worked. He hadn't spoken it aloud before. In his dreams it had been a command. In waking, it tasted like ash. Sam says Marwyn called me that. Said I was the key they were waiting for. Davos sucked in a breath. Marwyn, the fat old archmaester. Not fat, Melisandre said softly, as if correcting a child. Her voice slid through the room like warm oil. And not old in the way you mean. Davos shot her a look. He's a maester. Melisandre's smile was small, without warmth. Chains do not bind what they cannot understand. Jon cut between them before the argument could root. He was too tired for their old battles. It doesn't matter what Marwyn is. Sam believes him. Sam saw something, and I've been seeing it too. He didn't want to describe the black Stair, the red glow beneath the world, the way his skin felt wrong in the dream, as if he were both freezing and burning. But the words came anyway, pulled out like thorns. A stair of black stone, Jon said. A place under. Fire. A door. Davos' face tightened. He had been with Stannis long enough to know when prophecy turned its head toward a man. And what does the letter say you should do? Jon's gaze fell to the map again, to the sharp island off the coast of Blackwater Bay. Dragonstone. The name itself carried old heat. It says the seal is weakening, Jon answered. That the doom was a lock, and it's coming loose. Melisandre stepped closer to the brazier, and the flames seemed to lean toward her. The fire has been showing me the same, she murmured. The world's old wounds have begun to bleed again. Davos' jaw clenched. If you're saying there's some old evil under the world, why in seven hells would we go digging for it? Jon's eyes rose. Because someone else already is. He thought of Bran's message, of that simple line that had felt like a bell tolling in his skull. Valyria didn't die. It went to sleep. And because the dead aren't waiting for us to be ready. Ghost shifted in the shadows, nails clicking softly on stone. Jon felt the direwolf's unease, sharp as a scent. Davos reached out and tapped Dragonstone on the map with a thick finger. You want to go there, Davos said, more statement than question. For Dragonglass. For Dragonglass, Jon agreed. And for answers. If Valyria made a lock with fire, then Dragonstone was built by the same hands. Maybe the same language. Maybe the same memory. Melisandre's eyes gleamed. And there is a queen with living fire, she said. You will not finish this without her. Davos made a sound like he'd bitten into something sour. Daenerys Targaryen. Jon said nothing. He imagined dragons, real dragons, not carved heads on pommels. He imagined heat strong enough to scorch away the cold that walked. He imagined also the cost, and his stomach hardened around it. He picked up a quill and pulled blank parchment closer. We send ravens, Jon said, to Winterfell, to Eastwatch, to anyone who will listen. Davos watched him write. And if they don't listen? Jon's hand did not pause. Then I go anyway. Melisandre's voice was almost tender. Good, she said. The world does not turn for men who hesitate. Outside, the wall groaned, deep, slow. like a great door shifting on ancient hinges. Jon's quill scratched faster, as if racing the sound. The road to Winterfell was a white throat-swallowing sound. Jon rode with his cloak pulled tight and his mind pulled tighter still, the letter tucked against his chest as if it were a blade. Snow drifted across the King's Road in soft heaps, hiding ruts and stones. The sky hung low, pale as old bone, and the wind moved through the trees like something searching. His escort was small men who had followed him before, men who trusted him because they had seen him bleed. They said little. The cold made speech feel like waste. When Winterfell's towers finally rose from the storm, Jon felt the familiar ache of home. Sharp, complicated, unwelcome. The castle looked the same as it had in his boyhood in some ways and utterly changed in others. The walls were mended, but the stones still carried scorch marks where fire had kissed it. New timber braces held up old halls. Winterfell had survived the Boltons and the dead, but survival left scars. The gates opened, and he rode into the yard to find Sansa waiting. She stood wrapped in gray furs, her face pale against the cold, her hair a soft flame under falling snow. Arya stood beside her, smaller, sharper, eyes like knives in a child's face. Jon's chest tightened at the sight of them. For a heartbeat, he was simply a brother returned. Then Sansa's gaze found his, and the warmth cooled. "You shouldn't have come alone," she said by way of greeting. Jon swung down from the saddle. "I didn't come alone. That's not what I meant," Sansa replied. Her eyes flicked to the men behind him, then back. "The north is thin. Every sword matters." Jon looked past her, toward the Godswool Gate, where Bran sat in his chair beneath a dusting of snow. Bran did not smile. Bran rarely did now. His eyes looked too old for his face, as if he stared at things far beyond the yard. Jon walked toward him, boots crunching. Ghost padded at his side, silent as ever, and Jon felt men's eyes follow the direwolf with that mix of awe and unease that power always drew. "Bran," Jon said. Bran's gaze met his, and Jon felt a strange chill, not from the air, but from the distance behind Bran's eyes. "You read the letter," Bran said. It wasn't a question. Jon's throat tightened. "You sent a message," he said, "about Valyria." Bran's mouth moved slightly, as if testing a memory. "It went to sleep," Bran said again. "But sleep is not death." Jon crouched, bringing himself closer to Bran's level. He hated that he had to crouch, hated the way it made Bran look smaller when Bran felt anything but. "What do you know?" Jon asked. Bran's eyes shifted, not away but through. Jon felt the hair on his arms rise. "I know the world has locks," Bran said softly, "and I know men are always trying to open them." Sansa stepped closer, impatience in her posture. "He's barely been here an hour," she said, and Jon heard the edge beneath her words. Fear disguised as authority. "If you came to talk riddles." "It's not riddles," Jon cut in, sharper than he am. He forced his voice down. "Sansa, there's something moving. Something bigger than the dead." Arya's eyes narrowed. "Bigger than the dead?" Arya echoed, as if tasting the words for lies. Jon reached into his cloak and pulled out Sam's letter. He held it out to Sansa, but it was Bran who watched it like he already knew every line. Sansa took it, read quickly, her brows knitting. Jon saw the moment the name landed in her mind. Aegon. Her lips parted slightly. "This is," she swallowed. "This is dangerous." Jon's jaw set. "The world is dangerous." Sansa's gaze lifted, steady and hard. "And you want to leave again," she said. "To chase this." "To Dragonstone," Jon said. "To speak with Daenerys." At that name, something in the yard seemed to stiffen. Northerners nearby muttered. A Targaryen queen was still, to many, a story soaked in madness. Sansa's mouth tightened. "You don't know her," she said. "I don't need to know her to know we need dragons," Jon replied. The words came too fast, too bare. "We need fire that can't be snuffed by winter." Arya stepped closer, voice low. "And if she's like her father?" Jon's gaze flicked to Arya. He remembered a mad king laughing as men burned. He remembered also Aemon's voice, weary, saying that blood did not make a man, but it made the world judge him anyway. "Then we deal with that," Jon said. "But if the letter is true, the choice might not be mine to make." Bran's voice was quiet, cutting through the tension like a thread. "It is yours," Bran said. "That's the cruel part." Jon turned back to him. "Show me," Jon demanded. "Show me what you see, because I'm tired of men telling me I'm meant for something and never saying what the something is." Bran's eyes held his. For a moment Jon thought Bran might refuse. Then Bran's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair, and the snow on the ground seemed to dim, as if the world leaned closer to listen. "In the Godswood," Bran said. "By the heart tree." Jon stood. Ghost moved with him. He followed Bran's chair through the gate into the Godswood, Sansa and Arya trailing behind like shadows that refused to be left out. The air inside the Godswood felt different, quieter, as if the snow itself fell more carefully. The heart tree stood white and red, leaves like hands drenched in blood, face carved into the bark staring down with a grim patience. Bran stopped beneath it. Jon stood before the tree, and for the first time since his resurrection he felt something old in the ground acknowledge him, like roots shifting. Bran looked up at him. "You want the truth," Bran said. Jon's breath steamed. "Yes." Bran's eyes rolled back, milk white, and the world fell away. Jon felt it like drowning. One moment he stood under the heart tree, the cold air biting his cheeks, Sansa's presence a tight knot behind him. The next, he was falling through images, through sound, through time itself. There was no ground. There was only motion. He flew over Winterfell, over the north, over the wall. He saw the wall from above, and it did not look like a wall. It looked like a seam, a stitched wound holding something back. He plunged south. He saw Oldtown's lantern-lit harbor, the Citadel like a pale crown. He saw, beneath it, a blue-green flame burning in darkness. Then fire filled everything. He saw Valyria before it died. He saw black stone towers so tall they made mountains look small. He saw dragons wheeling overhead, their wings slicing the sky. He saw men and women with pale hair and purple eyes walking through halls where the floors were glass and the walls were carved with beasts devouring men. He smelled incense and blood. He heard chains clinking, not on maesters but on slaves. He was pulled deeper, toward the heart of the city where the mountains ringed it like a crown. 14 volcanoes, 14 mouths glowing. He saw tunnels drilled into the mountains, deeper and deeper, lit by red light. He saw men chanting, their voices steady, purposeful. He saw symbols carved into stone, the same circles and lines Sam had described. A lock. Something stirred beneath it all, far below where fire should have made everything dead. Jon felt it as pressure against his mind. Hunger, a want that did not have a face because it did not need one. It noticed him. The sensation was obscene, like a hand inside his skull. Then came the doom. The mountains erupted, not wildly but in a pattern, like a net thrown tight. Fire poured up and out, and the sky turned the color of blood. Buildings melted, people screamed. But beneath the screaming Jon heard the chanting continue, unbroken. Men and women stood in a circle at the heart of a forge temple, hands cut, blood spilling into carved runes. Their faces were grim, not panicked. They were not surprised. They were finishing something they had chosen. The hunger below thrashed, and the net of fire tightened. Jon felt the lock being set, felt heat like a brand searing through the world's bones. The air tasted of molten metal. The sea boiled and became a smoking grave. Then time jumped, years, decades, centuries snapping like a rope in wind. Jon saw the lock dimming, not breaking, not yet, but weakening as magic returned. He saw dragons hatching again far away. He saw glass candles burning like eyes in dark places. He saw the dead stirring in the north, ice waking with memory. He saw a door beneath the world tremble. Then, impossibly, he saw himself. Not the man he was now, bearded and scarred, but a boy in black, standing on a stair of black stone spiraling down into red light. His face was set, solemn as if he had already chosen to die. Behind him, something vast moved in shadow, winged and black as the space between stars. Frost rimed the stair's edges, and heat shimmered beneath it. Fire and cold married into something wrong. A voice spoke in a language Jon did not know and yet understood in his bones. Finish. He tried to turn away. He tried to refuse. The vision held him like chains. Then he was slammed back into his body under the heart tree, gasping like a man dragged from icy water. Sansa's hands were on his arms, steadying him. Arya stood rigid, eyes wide. Ghost pressed against Jon's leg, a solid warmth. Bran's eyes returned from white to their usual distant calm. The snow continued to fall, as if nothing had happened. Jon's chest rose and fell hard. That, Jon rasped, was Valyria. Bran nodded. And the wall, Bran said softly. And the lock beneath the world. Sansa's face was pale. You're saying Valyria killed itself to seal something? She whispered, voice shaking with disbelief. Jon wiped at his mouth with the back of his hand, tasting ash that wasn't there. Yes, he said. The certainty in him felt foreign, stolen from the vision. And it's waking. Arya's voice was sharp. So what does this have to do with you? Jon looked at Bran. Tell them, Jon demanded. Tell them why you dragged me into that. Bran's gaze was steady. Because the lock was made with fire, Bran said. And the key was made with both. Sansa frowned. Both what? Bran's eyes flicked to Jon, and Jon felt the weight of it. Ice and fire, Bran said. Jon's throat tightened. The words hit like a bell. He thought of Lyanna Stark's face in his memory, beautiful and dying. He thought of Ned's silence. He thought of the name in the letter, Aegon. Sansa stared at him, and in her eyes Jon saw fear and suspicion and something like grief. No, she said softly. No, you can't be. Jon swallowed. I don't know what I am, he said, and it was the truest thing he'd said in days. But I know what I saw, and I know someone else is going to try to open that door. Bran's voice was quiet, but it landed heavy. Euron Greyjoy, Bran said. He's sailing toward the smoking sea. Arya's mouth tightened. So we kill him. Bran shook his head slightly. He is a hand, Bran said. Not the only hand. Sansa's eyes narrowed. And you, she said to Jon, are going to leave, again. To chase a queen with dragons and a city of ruin. Jon met her gaze. I have to, he said. Sansa's jaw tightened. Because you saw a vision, she snapped. Because a maester in Oldtown said you're some key in a lock you didn't even know existed? Jon's voice hardened. Because the wall groans at night, Jon said. Because men are vanishing beyond it. Because Bran saw it, and Sam saw it, and I've been dreaming it for weeks. Because if Valyria's lock fails, the dead won't be the worst thing we face. Silence fell. The heart tree's red leaves rustled, though there was no wind. Sansa looked away first, swallowing hard. When she looked back, her expression was a moss. K of duty. If you go, she said, you go with men. You do not go alone. Jon nodded once. I'll take Davos, he said, and a small party. We move fast. Arya stepped closer, eyes bright. I want to come. Jon shook his head. No, he said, and did not soften it. I need you here. For Sansa. For the North. Arya's jaw worked, but she did not argue. Not yet. Bran's voice came again, softer, almost like pity. When you stand before her, Bran said, tell her the truth, not just about dragons. About the lock. Jon's mouth went dry. She won't believe me. Bran's gaze was far away. She will, Bran said, because she's dreaming too. Jon looked up at the heart tree's carved face, its eyes deep and red as wounds. For a heartbeat, he felt something watching from within the wood, old and patient. Not a god, not a man, something that remembered the world before names. He turned away before it could look too long. I leave at dawn, Jon said. The snow kept falling, soft as ash. That night, the great hall felt too small for the weight of what had been spoken in the godswood. The hearth fire snapped inside, throwing orange light over stone and timber, over banners hanging limp in the cold. Men ate and drank because men always did, because the body demanded its rituals even when the mind broke. Jon sat at the high table with a cup he barely touched, watching the flames as if they might spell answers. Sansa sat opposite him, shoulders stiff, speaking in a low voice with Davos. Jon caught only fragments, ships, banners, the risk of bending knee to a foreign queen. Sansa's words were careful, but the fear beneath them bled through. Fear of losing the North, fear of trusting another ruler who might burn them for it. Tormund laughed too loudly near the hearth, drinking and slapping men on the shoulder as if noise could chase away the idea of doors beneath the world. But when he glanced toward Jon, the wildling's eyes were sober. Arya lingered at the edge of the firelight, watching. Jon felt her gaze like a knife at his back. He loved her for it. On the table before Jon lay a small shard of dragonglass, black and glossy, set beside Longclaw. The contrast made his stomach twist. One was a weapon of old cold, pulled from the earth. The other was Valyrian steel, forged in fire, passed down like a memory with teeth. Jon picked up the dragonglass. It was colder than stone ought to be. When he held it, his skin prickled, as if the shard remembered killing. He remembered too, stabbing another at the fist, the way it shattered like brittle ice. That memory was Sam's, not his, but it lived in Jon anyway, carried by friendship like blood carried heat. Sansa's voice rose slightly, cutting through his thoughts. "You don't know what she wants," she said, frustration sharpening her words. "Queens don't cross oceans out of kindness." Davos' reply was gentle but firm. "And kings don't ignore dragons out of pride," he said. "If she has fire that can fight the dead, we'd be fools not to speak with her." Sansa's gaze flicked to Jon, and the argument shifted into silence. She stood, coming to him, furs whispering over stone. "You're really going," she said, voice low enough that only he could hear. Jon set the dragonglass down. "Yes." Sansa's jaw tightened. "Because Bran showed you visions," she said. "Because a dead empire burned itself and left you holding the ash." Jon's eyes stayed on the fire. "Because if I don't, someone else will open that door," he said. "And then nothing we fight for here will matter." Sansa's voice softened, and that softness hurt more than her anger. "And what if you don't come back?" she asked. Jon turned to her then. Her eyes were bright, but she held her tears like she held Winterfell, tight-fisted, refusing to let it be taken. Jon felt a surge of protectiveness and guilt so sharp it nearly made him flinch. "I came back once already," he said, and hated that it sounded like reassurance. "I'll come back again." Sansa's mouth twisted. "That's not how it works," she whispered. "You don't get to bargain with death forever." Jon thought of the hunger beneath the world. Death would be a mercy compared to that. He reached out and took Sansa's hand, squeezing once. "Hold the North," he said. "Whatever happens." Sansa's fingers tightened around his. "I always do," she said, "even when my brothers leave me to do it alone." The words stung, but Jon didn't deny them. "You're not alone," he said. "You have Arya. You have the men who stayed." Sansa pulled her hand free gently, as if afraid to bruise him. "You have to be careful with Daenerys," she said. "Dragons aren't just weapons. They're appetites." Jon nodded. "I know." Across the hall, Tormund approached, his cup in hand. He smelled of ale and smoke, his beard frosted at the edges. "Crow," he said, not unkindly. "You look like a man who's about to do something stupid." Jon's mouth twitched. "I am," he said. Tormund grunted. "Good," he said. "Stupid men change the world. Wise men just complain when it changes." Jon almost laughed, then didn't. "The wall," Jon said. "If anything happens." "I know," Tormund cut in, surprising him with the seriousness. "If the dead come, we fight. If something worse comes, Tormund's brows knit. "We fight anyway." Jon nodded. He looked at Longclaw again. The wolf's head pommel gleamed. He thought of how the steel had warmed in Melisandre's hand. He thought of the black Stair. He thought of the name that had never belonged to him and yet clung. Aegon. He stood, pushing his chair back. "At dawn," he said to Davos, and Davos nodded immediately, as if he'd been waiting for the order. Arya stepped from the shadows, appearing beside Jon like a ghost. "If you die again," Arya said quietly, "I'll drag you back myself." Jon stared at her, surprised by the fierce tenderness behind the threat. He leaned down and pressed his forehead briefly to hers, as they had done as children when words failed. "Stay alive," he whispered. "All of you." Arya's eyes were hard, but her voice was soft. "Finish," she said, and Jon froze. "What did you say?" he demanded. Arya frowned. "I didn't mean." She shook her head. "It's just, when you were gone, I had dreams too. Strange ones. A stair. Fire. A word I didn't know, but... Ido." Jon's stomach turned to ice. He glanced toward Bran's place in the hall. Bran sat still, distant, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Jon couldn't tell if Bran had heard. The fire crackled. Outside, wind pressed against Winterfell's walls like a hand testing for weakness. Jon walked away from the warmth, feeling colder with every step, as if the world's door had already begun to open. Oldtown's rain turned to fog, and the fog turned to a damp that crawled into stone and stayed. Samwell didn't sleep much after sending the raven. He lay awake listening to the Citadel breathe, distant footsteps, the faint clink of chains, the rustle of pages. Once he thought he heard a whisper under his door, a soft sibilant sound like a candle flame speaking. He sat up, heart hammering, and the sound stopped as if it had never been. In the morning, he tried to focus on lessons. He listened to lectures on fevers and flux, on undulls and invasions. He nodded when spoken to. He smiled when appropriate. He felt like a man wearing someone else's skin. When the bell for midday tolled, all eras found him again, slipping into step beside him with the ease of a shadow. "You sent the message," all eras murmured. Samwell's throat tightened. "Yes." Alleras' eyes flicked briefly, sharp. "And now you're going to do something else foolish," all eras said, not a question. Samwell swallowed. "I need more," he said. If he's going toward a queen and a city of ruins, he can't go blind." Alleras' mouth twitched as if amused by Samwell's sudden steel. "Then come," all eras said, "before the Archmasters notice you're learning the wrong things." They moved through the Citadel's lower corridors, away from light and bustle. The air grew colder, wetter. Samwell felt the stone beneath his feet pulse faintly, as if something deep below kept time. All eras led him to a door Samwell hadn't seen before, half hidden behind a hanging tapestry. The tapestry showed a maester offering a book to a king. The king's eyes were painted hollow, as if the artist had known something about power. All eras lifted the tapestry and revealed a narrow stair descending into blackness. "This is older than the Citadel," all eras whispered. "Older than the Hightower's first stone. There are places beneath Oldtown that remember things men have tried to forget." Samwell hesitated, then forced himself down. His lantern flame shook with each step. The air smelled of damp parchment and old salt, but beneath it was something sharper, like burnt metal. At the bottom was a vault lined with shelves, crammed with books bound in strange leathers. Some were so old their pages looked like dried leaves. Others were sealed with wax or wrapped in chains. All eras set a finger to his lips, then pressed his ear to the stone door behind them, listening. The silence outside was thick. Satisfied, he turned back. Samwell ran his fingers over the spines, reading what titles he could. Most were in scripts he couldn't decipher. Some were in Valyrian, the letters tall and elegant. A few were in common tongue, scratched small as if to hide their meaning. He found one marked simply Conqueror. His pulse jumped. He pulled it free, careful. The book's cover bore a dragon sigil stamped so deeply the leather had cracked around it. Samwell opened it, and dust rose like a sigh. The pages were a mixture, some in common tongue, some in a hand so tight and slanted it looked like the writer feared being caught. There were sketches of coastlines, notes about fortresses, lists of names. Aegon, Visenya, Rhaenys, Dragonstone, Oldtown, the wall. Samwell's breath caught. The wall. His finger traced a line of ink, a crude drawing of a long white barrier, and beneath it words that made his skin prickle. The cold is not dead. It waits beyond the edge of the world like a wolf at a door. Fire alone is not enough. The lock was forged twice, once in stone and ice, once in blood and flame. Samwell's eyes widened. "This is a journal," he whispered. Alleras looked over his shoulder. "Or a confession," Alleras said softly. Samwell turned pages faster, scanning. There were mentions of dreams. Aegon dreaming of a darkness that swallowed kingdoms. There were mentions of the Song and the Hinge and the Last Hand. Then Samwell found it. A passage in Valyrian, copied carefully and then translated beneath in a shaky common tongue. The last mandate. When the net of flame grows thin and the north's door shudders, seek the one who carries both. He shall walk the black stair and make the fire bite the cold. He shall finish what was begun when Valyria chose to die. Samwell's throat closed. His vision swam. He had read the words, but it felt like the words were reading him. Alleras' voice was low. "You see," Alleras said. "It isn't new. It's old enough to have been waiting." Samwell's hands trembled. "Jon," he whispered. "It's Jon." A faint blue-green glow seeped through the stone, subtle but unmistakable. Samwell felt it in his teeth like a vibration. He turned his head toward the wall, heart pounding. The glass candle was burning again, somewhere below and near, and it felt as if it were listening to them red. Alleras stepped back instinctively. "Close the book," Alleras whispered. Samwell should have. He knew he should have, but his eyes snagged on a final line, written in a different hand, darker ink. "If the last hand fails, the fire will not hold, and the hunger beneath will wear the world like a crown." Samwell's breath hitched. He snapped the book shut as if it might bite him. The lantern flame fluttered wildly. For a moment, in the corner of his sight, Samwell thought he saw a shape in the vault, tall, motionless, as if made of smoke. He spun, but there was nothing there. Only shelves, only dust, only the slow drip of water somewhere unseen. Alleras grabbed his arm. "We leave," Alleras said. Samwell nodded, though his legs felt like stone. As they climbed the stair back toward the Citadel's ordinary world, Samwell could not stop hearing that word, the one that sat in the mandate like a nail. Finish. Marwyn left Oldtown the way storms left the sea, without asking permission. Samwell stood on the dock at dawn with fog curling around his boots, watching sailors load crates onto a small ship that looked too modest to carry the weight of what it was meant to do. The harbor was muted, sounds dampened by mist, gulls crying like lost children, ropes creaking, the soft thump of wood against wood. Marwyn strode along the dock with the certainty of a man who had already decided he would not drown. His chain clinked against his chest. He carried no escort of maesters, no solemn ritual of farewell. Only Alleras walked with him, calm and watchful, and Samwell suspected even the dock guards had been too uncertain to ask questions. Gilly stood close beside Samwell, the babe bundled tight, her face turned toward the ship with anxious eyes. She didn't understand why the fat, dangerous maester mattered. She understood only that Samwell was afraid, and fear was contagious. Marwyn stopped near the gangplank and turned. His gaze swept over Samwell, then lingered on Gilly and the child. There was something in his expression like reluctant respect. "You did well," Marwyn said to Samwell, as if they were speaking about a lesson and not the end of the world. Samwell swallowed. "I found more," he said. He wanted to tell Marwyn about the Conqueror's journal, about the line that spoke of the hunger wearing the world like a crown. But the dock felt too open, too full of eyes. Marwyn grunted, as if he already knew. "Of course you did," he said. "You have the stink of a man who can't stop digging once his fingers touch truth." Alleras handed Marwyn a wrapped package, oilcloth around something long and thin. Samwell caught a glimpse of dark glass beneath. Dragon glass. Marwyn took it with the ease of a man accepting a weapon. "You're sailing east," Samwell said, though he already knew. "To Daenerys." Marwyn's grin was brief. "To the only living fire the world can't ignore," he said. "And to warn her that Westeros is not the only thing waiting for her." Samwell's throat tightened. "Will she listen?" Marwyn snorted. "Targaryens listen when the world speaks in flame," he said. "And the world is beginning to shout." Gilly shifted, tightening her hold on the babe. "Are you going to bring dragons?" she asked suddenly, her voice small but earnest. Marwyn's eyes flicked to her, surprised. Then his expression softened by a fraction. "If the gods are kind," Marwyn said. "But gods are rarely kind. They are interested." Samwell flinched at the word. Interested, like a boy watching ants burn. Marwyn stepped closer to Samwell, lowering his voice. "You sent your raven," Marwyn said. "Good, but ravens are slow, and the world is speeding up." Samwell swallowed. "What else can I do?" he asked, the question raw. Marwyn's gaze was sharp. "Learn," he said, "and stay alive while you do it. The Citadel will try to bury you in ink. Don't let them." He glanced at Gilly again. "Keep them safe. If this comes to what I think it will, small lives will matter more than crowns." Alleras stood silent, but his eyes watched the fog as if he expected something to emerge from it. Marwyn looked out over the water. The fog rolled like breath. Somewhere beyond it, the sea waited, and beyond that, the world. "If you see the candle burn brighter," Marwyn said without turning, "don't stare too long. Some sights don't let go once they've been seen." Samwell's skin prickled. "It's been near," he admitted. Marwyn nodded as if that were inevitable. "It will be nearer," he said. "The lock is listening for the key." Samwell's mouth went dry. "Jon," he whispered. Marwyn turned back, and for a moment his grin vanished. "Yes," Marwyn said simply. "Jon." He stepped onto the gangplank, then paused, looking over his shoulder. "And Samwell," Marwyn added, voice almost amused, "if you ever find yourself wondering whether Valyria deserved its doom, remember this: sometimes the worst men do the best thing once, and then die so the world can live." Then he was aboard. The ship pulled away from the dock slowly, oars dipping soundlessly into gray water. The fog swallowed the hull as if eating it. Samwell stood until the last shadow vanished. The high tower's beacon was a faint smear of light through mist, like a dying star. Gilly's hand found his sleeve. "Sam," she whispered, "what's happening?" Samwell tried to answer, but the truth was too large for words. He looked down at the babe's sleeping face, so peaceful it felt like a lie. "The world is waking," he said finally, and as if to prove it, somewhere deep beneath Oldtown, a blue-green flame pulsed, steady, patient, as if something far away had opened an eye. The sea beyond Slaver's Bay tasted different. Daenerys stood at the prow, cloak snapping behind her, and watched the city shrink into distance until it became a smear of stone and smoke beneath a bruised sky. Meereen had been hers, and yet it had never felt like home. It had been a battlefield she wore like a crown, heavy and sharp-edged. Now she left it behind, and the weight shifted but did not vanish. Tyrion stood near her, smaller and bundled against the wind. His eyes narrowed as if measuring the horizon for lies. Grey Worm and his Unsullied lined the deck with disciplined stillness, their faces blank. Behind them, sailors moved with quiet urgency, wary of the weather and warier of their queen's dragons. Above, the dragons circled. Drogon flew higher than the others, a black shape against cloud. Regal and Viserion wheeled closer, their shadows sweeping over the deck like omens. When their wings beat, the air seemed to thicken, as if the world itself held its breath. Daenerys felt it, restlessness in them that did not match the sea's movement. They were not merely eager, they were listening. She had dreamed again the night before they sailed. a stair of black stone, a red glow beneath the world. A man standing at the top of the stair, dark hair whipping in heat wind, eyes gray as winter sea. He turned to her, and though his mouth did not move, she heard the word inside her skull like a bell. Finish. She had woken with her palms sweating and her throat raw, as if she had been shouting in her sleep. Tyrion spoke without looking at her. "You haven't slept," he observed. Daenerys' eyes stayed on the horizon. "Sleep is for those who believe tomorrow is promised," she said. Tyrion's mouth twitched, but there was no humor in it. "Then you're finally thinking like a ruler," he said. He followed her gaze, then nodded toward the west. "Westeros is there, and Dragonstone." The word stirred something in Daenerys' blood. Dragonstone was a story she'd been raised on. Black stone halls, storm winds, the place her family had fled to before the Doom. A fortress carved in the shape of dragons. A last cradle of Valyria's blood. "I will take the throne," Daenerys said, more to herself than to him. The vow had been her spine for so long it felt like bone. Tyrion nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "but before you take the throne, you may have to take the island. There are men there, not loyal men." Daenerys' gaze sharpened. "All men are not loyal until they kneel," she said. Tyrion's eyes flicked to her, cautious. "And some kneel with daggers hidden," he said. "Westeros is full of men who smile while they sharpen steel." Daenerys felt anger stir, familiar and comforting. "Let them try," she said. Above, Drogon roared, and the sound made the ship's timbers tremble. Tyrion watched the dragon, and Daenerys saw something like unease cross his face, quickly hidden. "You feel it too," Tyrion said quietly. Daenerys' jaw tightened. "Feel what?" Tyrion hesitated, as if weighing whether to speak. "The world is louder," he said finally. "Stories that were once just stories have begun to feel like warnings. When I was a boy, people spoke of Valyria and laughed, then shivered when they thought no one was watching." He looked out at the dark sea. "Now the laughter is gone." Daenerys' fingers gripped the ship's rail. "Valyria is dead," she said, but the words sounded less certain than she wanted. Tyrion's voice softened. "Is it?" he asked. "Or did it do what desperate powers do? Burn the bridge behind them so no one can follow?" Daenerys' stomach tightened. She thought of Viserys' bitterness, of his insistence that the world had stolen everything from them. She thought of her own dreams, the faces in fire, the chanting that had not sounded like panic. She thought of a door closing beneath flame. "What are you saying?" she demanded. Tyrion's eyes met hers, steady. "I'm saying you may be inheriting more than a throne," he said. "You may be inheriting a duty your ancestors tried to bury in ash." Daenerys' throat felt tight. Duty. The word had been used to chain her before, by men who called themselves her protectors. "I am not a tool," she said sharply. Tyrion nodded, as if he'd expected it. "No," he said, "but tools can become hands, and sometimes the hand that holds the blade decides where it cuts." Daenerys looked up as Regal dipped lower, his green wings catching a sliver of pale light. The dragon's eyes were bright, intelligent in a way that made her skin prickle. He looked not at her but beyond her, toward the west, as if he could see through sea and storm to something waiting. Drogon roared again, and this time the sound felt like an answer. Daenerys' blood ran cold despite the wind. "They're calling to something," she whispered, more admission than question. Tyrion's voice was quiet. "Or something is calling to them," he replied. Daenerys stared westward until her eyes stung with salt. The sea was a moving darkness. The sky was a bruise. Somewhere beyond both lay Dragonstone, black and jagged. Somewhere beyond that lay the Iron Throne. And somewhere, deeper than sea and sky, a stair of black stone spiraled down toward red light, waiting for a foot to touch its first step. Euron kept his plans close, not because he feared betrayal. Betrayal was as natural as breathing, but because he enjoyed the moment men realized they had been pawns all along. In the cabin beneath the deck, lanterns swung gently with the ship's motion. casting oily light over maps and carved tokens. Red ink marked the smoking sea like a wound. Notes in cramped script crowded the margins. Names of winds, currents, reefs that weren't reefs. Warnings in tongues that stung the eyes to read. Victarion stood over the table in his armor, arms crossed like a wall. His face was carved from brute certainty. He looked at the map as if he could solve it by glowering hard enough. "This is madness," Victarion growled. "You take us into cursed waters with half a fleet and a belly full of wine." Euron smiled without looking up. "Wine helps," he murmured. "It makes fear taste sweeter." Victarion slammed a fist on the table, rattling lantern light. "We came for dragons," he spat. "For the queen, for plunder, not for—" He jerked his chin toward the red-smeared circle. "That." Euron's fingers slid along the horn's black band, slow as a caress. The horn seemed to drink the light around it. "Dragons are a door," Euron said. "Not the room." Victarion's eyes narrowed. "Speak plain." Euron lifted his gaze, one eye bright with cruel amusement. "Plain words are for plain men," he said. "But if you insist, Valyria was locked, and the key is returning to the world." Victarion scoffed. "Locked by what?" "Fire."
Euron's smile videnet.
"Fire," he agreed. "And something colder." Against the wall, one of the warlocks began to whisper, his voice thin. Victarion turned, disgust curling his lip. "Shut them up." Euron raised a hand, and Victarion stopped as if tugged by an invisible leash. Euron's gaze stayed on the warlocks. Their chained bodies looked small, fragile. Their eyes looked like trapped animals. "Tell him," Euron said softly. "Tell my brother what you told me." The warlock's lips trembled. "The sea burns," he rasped. "The sky remembers. The stone holds a hunger." Victarion's jaw tightened. "Hunger," he repeated, contemptuous. "A monster story." The warlock shook his head violently, chains clinking. "Not monster," he whispered. "Worse. Old. It sleeps under the fire, dreaming of cold. It wants the world." Euron cut in, voice gentle. "It wants to wake," he said. Victarion stared at him. "And you want to wake it?" Victarion said, disbelief thick. Euron laughed, a quiet sound. "I want to own it," he corrected. "Men kneel to gods because they fear them. I prefer gods that kneel to me." Victarion's face twisted. "That's blasphemy." Euron leaned forward slightly, and his eye gleamed. "Blasphemy is a word priests use when they're losing," he said. "And the drowned god is very, very quiet these days." The ship's timbers creaked. Deep and strange, not the ordinary groan of wood and wave, but a low vibration like something enormous shifting in the dark Bennett. "ADH them." Victarion's expression faltered for the first time. "What was that?" Victarion demanded. Euron's smile did not move. "The sea listened," he said. "It likes my horn." Victarion glanced down at the black-banded thing, uneasy despite himself. "That horn killed men when you blew it." "Only weak men," Euron murmured. "Men who couldn't hold their breath while the world changed." Victarion's hand tightened around the haft of his axe. "You're going to get us all killed." Euron's laughter was soft. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps I'll get us all crowned." He reached for a small carved token on the table, obsidian shaped like a stair spiraling downward. He set it beside the red circle on the map. "The lock is weakening," Euron said, voice almost reverent. "The dragons woke it. The candles woke it. The dead walking in the north woke it. And now there's a man with the blood of winter and the shadow of Valyria in his veins." Victarion's eyes narrowed. "Who?"
Euron's green sharpened.
"Jon Snow," he said, savoring the name. "Or whatever name he's wearing." Victarion spat on the floor. "I don't care about some bastard crow." Euron's eye gleamed. "You will," he said softly, "because he's walking toward the same door I am. And I intend to be waiting when he arrives." The warlock began to sob quietly, his shoulders shaking. Victarion looked away, unsettled in spite of his contempt. Euron leaned back, fingers still resting on the horn. The lantern light made shadows leap across his face, turning his smile into something not quite human. Outside the cabin, the sea darkened, and the air tasted faintly of smoke though no fire burned. Far ahead, beyond sight, the smoking sea waited like a mouth. The sea north of Eastwatch was a cruel teacher. It did not care that Jon had marched through blizzards and fought dead men. It did not care that Davos had once been a smuggler who laughed at storms. The water rose and fell like a beast's breathing, and the wind hit the ship with fists that made men stagger. Ice clung to ropes and rails, turning simple tasks into hazards. Sailors moved carefully, boots sliding, curses whipped away by gale. The ship's hull groaned as if it regretted every nail hammered into it. Jon stood on deck anyway, refusing the warmth below. He wanted the cold, kept his mind sharp, kept his dreams from swallowing him entirely. But the dreams came even in waking now. Sometimes, when the ship's bow rose over a wave and the sea dropped away beneath, Jon felt the same falling he had felt under the heart tree. Sometimes the spray that hit his face tasted briefly of ash instead of salt. Sometimes, in the corner of his sight, he saw black stone where there should have been only sky. Davos approached him with careful steps, gripping a rope as he came. "You look like you're about to throw yourself over," Davos shouted over the wind. Jon didn't look away from the horizon. "If I do," he said, "tie a rope to me. Pull me back." Davos' mouth twisted. "I'd rather not," he called. "Too much work." Jon almost smiled, and then a wave slammed into the hull and the ship shuddered like it had been struck. Men shouted. A sailor fell hard, scrambling up with a bleeding hand. Davos' face sobered. He moved to stand beside Jon, shoulders hunched against wind. "How far?" he asked. "Days," Jon said. "If the storm lets us." Davos followed Jon's gaze. The horizon was a smear of dark beneath thick cloud. "And when we get there," Davos said, "we'll be walking into a dragon's mouth." Jon's jaw tightened. "Better than waiting for the world to freeze." Davos glanced at him. "Sansa looked at you like she was watching you die," he said quietly. Jon's grip tightened on the rail until his knuckles whitened. "She's watched enough men die," he said. "I won't make promises I can't keep." The wind howled, and for a moment it sounded like a voice saying his name. Aegon, soft and insistent. Jon flinched, looking around, but no one else reacted. Only Ghost lifted his head, ears pricked, red eyes fixed on nothing. "You heard it?" Jon murmured, more to Ghost than to Davos. Ghost's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, not at the sea but at something deeper. Jon felt it, unease pulsing through the bond like a warning. That night, the storm eased only enough for exhaustion to crawl into Jon's bones. He went below deck briefly, forced himself to drink warm broth that tasted of fish and salt. Men slept in heaps, bodies swaying with the ship's motion. Jon lay down, closed his eyes, and the black stair rose immediately. He stood at its top, heat on his face, cold on his back. The air shimmered. The stone beneath his boots felt slick, like glass. He heard a distant chanting, steady as a heartbeat. He took one step down. The world shifted. He saw Daenerys' face in firelight, her eyes bright, her expression hard as a blade. He saw dragons overhead, their shadows sweeping over black stone halls. He saw a crown, iron and sharp, and behind it, a deeper crown made of something older, darker, as if the world itself wore teeth. He heard the word again, "Finish." He tried to turn away, but the stair pulled. He took another step. The red glow deepened. The cold sharpened into something that felt like attention. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he snapped awake with a gasp. Davos stood over him, face tight. "We're close," Davos said. "You need to see this." Jon rose, heart pounding, and climbed back onto deck. The storm clouds had torn open briefly, revealing a strip of pale sky. Ahead, through mist and spray, An island rose from the sea like a jagged black tooth. Dragonstone. Its cliffs were dark, its shape harsh, and even from here Jon could see the outlines of towers carved like dragons, their stone mouths open to the wind. Lightning flickered far off, and for an instant the fortress looked like something alive, waiting. Jon's breath caught. The air tasted different here, salt and smoke, faintly, as if the island exhaled old fire. Ghost padded beside him, hackles raised, staring at the black shore as if recognizing a predator. Davos' voice was low. "Still want to go ashore?" Jon didn't answer. His skin prickled with the same vibration he'd felt beneath the Citadel, beneath the heart tree. The lock was listening, and he, somehow, was being heard. Dragonstone smelled of salt and old fire. Jon felt it the moment his boots hit the island's stone. The air was damp and cold, but beneath it lingered a faint warmth, as if the rock remembered being molten. The cliffs rose steep and black, and the sea crashed below with relentless violence, spitting foam like a mouth gnashing teeth. They were led through winding passages carved from dark stone, past walls shaped like scaled backs and gaping jaws. Torches burned in dragon-shaped sconces, their flames making the carved mouths look as if they breathed. Jon's skin prickled with every step. The place felt like a memory he shouldn't have, like a dream made real. Davos walked beside him, posture wary, eyes darting. "This place gives me the shivers," Davos muttered under his breath. "And I've smuggled onions through worse." Jon didn't answer. He could hear something in the stone, too faint to be a sound, more like a rhythm, a pulse. The same pulse he'd felt under the heart tree, the same pulse Sam had described beneath Oldtown. Fire answering fire. They were brought into the great hall. It was vast, cold, lit by torches that threw harsh shadows across black stone. A throne sat at the far end, not iron but dark and carved, severe. On it sat Daenerys. She was smaller than the dream had made her, and yet she filled the hall like heat fills a room. Her hair was pale, braided back, her face stern. Her eyes fixed on Jon with a sharp intensity that made him feel stripped. Tyrion stood at her side, hands clasped behind his back, watching Jon with a look that was careful and calculating. Melisandre and Grey Worm stood nearby, still as statues. The unsullied lining the hall did not move, but Jon could feel their readiness like drawn steel. Daenerys' gaze flicked to Ghost, then back to Jon. "You came," she said. Jon stepped forward, salt still damp on his cloak, and knelt. Not because he meant to submit, but because the room demanded some gesture of respect to keep words from turning into blood. "I came to speak," Jon said, voice steady. Daenerys' mouth tightened. "Most men come to beg," she said, "or to lie." Jon lifted his head. "I'm not here to beg," he said, "and I'm tired of lies." For a heartbeat, something like amusement touched Daenerys' eyes. It vanished quickly. "Then speak," she said. Jon felt Davos' presence behind him, solid and tense. He felt Ghost at his heel, unmoving, watching the queen like a wolf watching a fire. "We need dragonglass," Jon said. "The dead are coming. Not men. Not armies. The dead." Tyrion's gaze sharpened. He didn't scoff. Jon wondered what Tyrion had already seen, what stories he'd already decided might be true. Daenerys leaned forward slightly. "You sail across dangerous waters to tell me a story I've heard since I was a girl," she said. "Why should I believe you?" Jon's jaw tightened. "Because I've fought them," he said. "Because I've watched men die twice, once when they fell and again when they rose. Because here's a war you can't win with titles." Daenerys' eyes flickered. "And you want my dragons," she said simply. "I want your fire," Jon said. Silence held the hall. The torches hissed softly. Somewhere far above, Jon thought he heard a distant rumble, like a dragon shifting in a pit. Tyrion spoke then, voice mild. "The Night's Watch has sent men south with wild tales before," he said. "But you're not the Night's Watch now, are you?" Jon's gaze snapped to him. "No," Jon said. "I'm the one who came back from death. I'm the one who watched the wall shudder like it was alive." I'm the one who knows the world's edge is breaking. Daenerys' posture stiffened. You were dead, she said. Not disbelief but fascination edged with caution. Jon's throat tightened. Yes, he said. And I don't think it will let me stay alive for nothing. Daenerys' fingers tightened on the throne's arm. For a moment, Jon saw something behind her eyes. Something wary, as if she recognized the shape of that sentence because she'd lived inside it. Fire didn't choose its vessels kindly. Jon drew a breath. This was the part he didn't want to say. This was the part that sounded like madness. There's more than dragonglass, Jon said. There's a lock. Tyrion's eyes narrowed. A lock, he echoed. Jon nodded once, feeling every gaze in the hall. Valyria, he said. It didn't just fall. It burned itself to seal something beneath the world. A door, and it's weakening now. Daenerys went utterly still. The torches flickered, and the shadows on the ceiling shifted. For an instant, the dragon-carved ribs of the hall looked like a stair spiraling upward into darkness. Daenerys' voice was quiet. How do you know this? She asked. Jon's mouth went dry. Because I saw it, he said. Because my brother saw it. Because my friend in Oldtown found words that were meant to stay buried. And because I've been dreaming of a black stair and a word I can't stop hearing. Daenerys' eyes widened a fraction. A black stair, she whispered, and Jon felt the room tilt. Tyrion's gaze flicked to her sharply. Your Grace. Daenerys did not look at him. She stared at Jon as if seeing him for the first time. Finish, she said softly. Jon's blood went cold. The word had not come from his mouth. It had come from hers, like an echo finally meeting its source. For a heartbeat, everything in the hall seemed to hush. Even the soldiers' breathing felt distant. Then the air changed. A faint vibration ran through the stone beneath their feet. Subtle, but Jon felt it in his teeth. Daenerys' hand tightened on the throne. Tyrion's eyes darted, unsettled. Somewhere deep in Dragonstone, something answered. Not a roar, a pulse. Jon met Daenerys' gaze, and in it he saw the same thing he had felt under the heart tree and on the ship. The sense of a door listening. Daenerys' voice was low. If what you're saying is true, she whispered, then the world is not fighting for a throne. It's fighting to St. I closed. Jon's jaw set. Yes, he said. Daenerys rose slowly from the throne, stepping down as if drawn by something she couldn't name. She stopped a few paces from Jon, close enough that he could see the strain around her eyes, the sleeplessness that matched his own. We will speak again, she said. Not here, not with so many ears. Jon nodded once, relief and dread twisting together. Then let's speak, he said, before someone else opens it. Daenerys' gaze flicked upward, toward the hall's shadowed ceiling where dragon shapes lurked in torchlight. For a moment, her face looked almost frightened. Someone already is, she said quietly, and somewhere far away, across black water and smoking ruin, a hunger beneath the world stirred, slow, patient, as if it had heard its key walk into the room.